Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy voy a compartir con ustedes una parte con un libro que estoy leyendo hoy. Y yo quiero compartir con ustedes porque es difícil para mostrar a ustedes que muchas veces hay algún tipo de libros y contextos y cosas que te necesitas leer que tú no puedes entender la primera vez. Tú necesitas leer alguna vez y tomar tiempo para pensar en por qué este autor escribe esto, cuál es el sentir, cuál es el cosa que él quiere que yo entender. Ese es un buen ejemplo con esta. Ese es el libro, Clive James, Cultural Amnesia. Muy interesante libro. Hoy voy a compartir un parte con un capítulo que él escribió para describir el filósofo muy famoso de los años 1920, 1950, Ludwig Wittgenstein. Y los libros de Wittgenstein también son muy difíciles, pero este es un comentario con un parte con algunos con estos libros. Entonces, es no solo el arte original de Wittgenstein, también es el pensamiento con este señor. Después él leyó algo con sus libros. Es un poco difícil, pero yo quiero compartir porque cuando tú lees primero parece muy ordinario, pero solo después que piensas, ¿cuál es el sentido de esta? Tú necesitas pensar otra vez. Pero puede ser un poco más claro cuando yo lea esto. So, hello from Medellín. Today I'm going to share with you a reading for the reason that it's complicated, it's difficult, not easy to understand. Because often there are types of books, sometimes you read it and you think, well, okay, I've read that, but I don't really understand that. And you go back and read it again and you're still thinking, okay, I think I've got it now, but something that really makes you think. So I'm going to read you a very short piece from this book, Clive James's Cultural Amnesia. Clive James, for those of us who were around in England in the 1980s, was a famous TV show host, but in his later years he was actually an academic of some note, which is what he shows in this particular book, because the breadth of reading that he covers here is enormous. But in this particular chapter of the book, he's talking about the works of Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was a very famous Austrian philosopher, active during the 1920s up to about the 1950s at Cambridge. And Wittgenstein's books themselves are famous for being difficult to read. So he's talking about his experience of reading one of these books, specifically the blue and brown books as they're called, which are very short sort of notebooks of Wittgenstein's ideas. So he's writing about his experience of reading this type of writing and how that makes sense to him as a writer. So you see where we're going with this. We have multiple levels of interpretation, but the text that we end up with looks quite easy to read. It's not lots of complicated vocabulary, but when you really think about it, you really have to think about it. So I'm going to share this with you anyway. You can listen to it just as a reading to get a sense of how English sounds, because that's a very good example. Clive James's writing is very, very good in this sense. He has a very nice style of writing. But then maybe later on you might really think hard about, what does he really mean? Well, we'll give it a go. This is from page 806. We acted as though we had tried to find the real artichoke by stripping it of its leaves. Ludwig Wittgenstein, quoted from the Blue and Brown books, page 125. This is the Wittgenstein that matters to a writer. There is a Wittgenstein that matters to professional philosophers, but they can prove it only to each other. The Wittgenstein that matters to a writer might be mistaken for his meaning by ordinary readers, but he can never be mistaken for his poetic quality, which is apparent even in his plainest statement. The precision of his language we can take for granted, and perhaps he should more often have done the same. His true and unique precision was in registering pre-verbal states of mind. In the Blue and Brown books, page 137, he proposes noticing, seeing, conceiving process that happens before it can be described in words. That indeed is the only way of describing it. It sounds very like the kind of poetic talent that we are left to deal with after we abandon the notion, as we must, that poetic talent is mere verbal ability. What we call understanding a sentence has in many cases a much greater similarity to understanding a musical theme than we might be inclined to think. This is Wittgenstein's book, page 167. But he doesn't want us to think about music as a mechanism to convey a feeling, joy for example. Music, says Wittgenstein, conveys to us itself. So when we read a sentence as if it were a musical theme, the music doesn't convey a separate sense that compounds with the written meaning. We get the feeling of a musical theme because the sentence means something. I thought he was getting very close to the treasure chamber when he wrote this. In 1970, reading the Blue and Brown books every day in the Copper Kettle in Cambridge, I made detailed transcriptions in my journal every few minutes. It didn't occur to me at the time that his prose was doing to me exactly what he was in the process of analysing. It sounded like music because it was so exactly right. There. So, on one hand, that's a very nice example of Clive James's style of writing, which I hope you agree is very sparse but quite easy to read. But the ideas he's talking about, you really have to sit down and think hard about. Yeah? So I'll leave you to ponder that. Déjame saber, como siempre, en los comentarios. But if you can find a copy of this book, I highly recommend it. But for now, from Medellin, we'll say cheerio.